सेशन क्यूरेट किया है। हम आज जिस टॉपिक पे बात करेंगे वो है climate justice and embedded injustices. I'm very lucky to be joined by a very, very esteemed panel of guests, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce them and get them on stage to talk to all of you. Now, most of these guests don't need an introduction, but for formality's sake, I will introduce them. Ms. Afia Salam Sahiba, she has a master's in geography and has been a journalist for the past 4 decades. She started as a cricket journalist, but her focus has increasingly been on rights-based issues, especially those related to the environment and climate change. She is a development practitioner who volunteers with non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations, and she has been visiting faculty at 2 universities in Karachi. Ms. Afia Salam, can you please join us on stage? The next panelist we have with us is Ms. Zoha Tunio. She is an investigative journalist with a special interest in climate change reporting. Her words have appeared in Newsline magazine, Inside Climate News, where she was a Roy Howard Fellow, Associated Press, and Washington Post. She's written about air quality, extreme heat, and the floods in Pakistan. In November 2022, she was one of 20 journalists to be awarded the Earth Journalism Fellowship to cover COP27. Please join us on stage, Zoha. The next panelist we have with us is Mr. Ahmad Shabbar. He is the founder of Pakistan Maholiyati Tahaffuz Movement, a grassroots effort aimed at pushing for climate justice. A scientist and engineer by profession, he started Garbage Can, a social entrepreneurship company which spreads awareness and provides services for proper waste management and sustainable transformation. He is the founder of The Environmental, an online platform to raise awareness, and he helped organize the first climate march and help protect the Buddu Bandal Islands as lead petitioner in a case before the Sindh High Court. Thank you so much for being with us. Our final panelist is Matthieu Paley, a French photographer and regular contributor for National Geographic. He's best known for his work documenting communities in the western region of the Greater Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, and the Pamir Mountains. He's interested in documenting communities that are misrepresented or misunderstood with a particular focus on geopolitically sensitive areas. He has worked on stories including air pollution, which is a global story, and water pollution, focusing specifically on South Asia, especially India and Pakistan. Thank you for being with us, Matthieu. So the topic for today's conversation is climate justice and embedded injustices. Through this conversation, we hope to highlight the complex interplay between systemic injustices and to try to identify what steps can be taken to adopt a people-centric approach. Now, climate change is something that doesn't really need an introduction. आप सबको इस issue पे बहुत आपने सुना होगा over the past year, especially with the floods. We all know that Pakistan is especially vulnerable to climate change impacts. That includes high temperatures, riverine flooding, coastal flooding, sea level intrusion. And with that, we have the issue of pollution and environmental degradation. And that is making the air and water unsafe and unfit for humans in Pakistan. Now, while climate change threatens all people, the most vulnerable people bear the brunt of the climate crisis. And they're the ones who contribute the least to it. They face disproportionate challenges in terms of extreme weather events, in terms of their health effects, food, water, and livelihood security, migration, forced displacement, loss of livelihood, loss of cultural identity, and other related risks. Discussing climate justice is the first step to understanding how we can include these indigenous issues and voices in this conversation and strengthen our knowledge. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to the panel. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. I'd like to go straight to Ms. Afia Salam. What exactly do we mean when we talk about climate justice? What is the issue that we're talking about, and how can we understand it?
Okay, so I think the word justice says it all, that it needs to be equitable, it needs to be fair. And when we're talking about the embedded injustices, it also very clearly alludes to the fact that there are systemic injustices, as you just very rightly pointed out. And when we see the impact of climate change playing its part, then the situation of those very people who are already facing injustices is exacerbated. So I mean, that is the shortest definition that I can come up with, because when you've listed so many things, we have to also bifurcate that what is climate change. So climate injustices are something that we can barely do anything about. The response is where, you know, we need to ensure to bridge that gap of injustice and response.
So thank you so much for that succinct introduction. And to move further along in this conversation of what we can do with climate injustice, one of the platforms that we have is the Conference of the Parties, which took place in November, COP27. So Zoha, I'd like to go to you. As one of 20 journalists from developing countries who was given the Earth Journalism Fellowship to cover COP27, I'd like for you to give us an example of what climate justice conversations were happening at COP27 and how it was used as a platform to talk about this issue, especially for developing nations.
Thank you for that question, Maha. So I'll just give a very brief introduction of what the Conference of Parties is, which is that it's a platform for multilateral negotiations where countries and heads of states and representatives get together to decide on what the world's approach to climate change and what the policy is going to be like for the coming year. And this was a particularly important COP because this was one where we were advocating, and when I say we, I mean developing countries were advocating for loss and damage money. And so that inherently is based in the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities of nations. And I'd just like to say that climate justice works in two ways. So there's your inter-country responsibility, which is to say that high-emitting nations are more responsible for climate change as opposed to low-emitting countries. And then you've got climate justice within countries, right? So your existing inequalities, say within Pakistan, are going to be exacerbated because of that. And I think what happened at COP27 was really, really important in moving that climate justice conversation forward, because for the first time in 30 years, we got a promise or I'd say intent to acknowledge and accept the fact that yes, developed countries have impacted the planet the most, and there was certain responsibility towards developing nations that haven't really caused this problem. So I'd say that was very, very big. But how we take that conversation forward within our country would perhaps be very, very different in the sense that we've established that on a global level. Now we need to address existing inequalities within our own systems. And so I'd say that is how the conversations differs when it's happening on a global level versus when it happens on a national level.
And within the global level as well, we need to focus on ensuring that these developed countries are actually fulfilling the promises that they make to us at these Conference of the Parties. So I think in terms of what are next steps for Pakistan on the international climate justice lens, could you speak about that a little?
I mean, this is a panel of esteemed professionals and experts who've spent a lot of time in this area. I'm still very, very young, so correct me if I'm wrong and please feel free to jump in. But I think Pakistan's played an incredibly important role in that it was also chair of the G77, so it was really at the forefront, and then unfortunately because of the floods as well, we were a country that was highlighted at COP27. Like you said, going forward, regardless of whether we're at the forefront or not, that advocacy needs to continue, right? That advocacy for now we've set up intent, now you have given us the political will. When I say you, I mean developed countries. What's next is that you begin to establish systems, right? Where is this money going to come from? Who is this going to be given to? What percentage is going to be given to who? Because even within developing countries, there's a lot of disagreement between who deserves this money the most. You've got your small island nations, and you've got your least developed countries, and then you've got, you know, emerging economies, countries like Pakistan and India, both which are very different economies, are both part of the G77. So I think what Pakistan needs to do is sort of continue on its advocacy for this responsibility to be taken seriously and for actual actionable steps to come into light. I think that's very important. We've gotten the intent. Where's this money going to come from is the next question that we need to advocate for.
Thank you, Zoha. And that's a really succinct example of what the international sphere with regards to climate justice is like and what the next steps are then. But let's move to more of a local, national level. Ahmad Saab, can you talk about your journey as an activist and what really led you to found Pakistan Maholiati Tahaffuz movement? What is the aim behind the movement? Who are the people who are involved in it, and what do they want?
Thank you for that question. Well, very briefly, like I've worked at a nuclear reactor, I've worked on removing carbon dioxide from the airstream, came back to Pakistan and started garbage can system with waste management. Part of the reason my education is in physics and mechanical and energy engineering, nothing to do with solid waste management board, but I noticed that nobody was actually working on sustainability. So that's when like I dived into it. And once I started working with waste management, I realized that our waste management issue cannot be resolved until unless we resolve the child labor issue, urban flooding, जो गुज्जर नाले के हवाले से जिसके उस पे आड़ में जो है गुज्जर नाले के घर गिरा दिए गए, health issues. We need to make the role of women within waste management visible. 73% of the primary waste managers in the world are women. फिर आपका the refugee crisis as well, the mafias and the sanitation workers के जो हुकूक है, minimum wage उनको नहीं मिल रही सही तरीके से. आपके sanitation workers when they go into the gutters and gas की leakages वगैरह होते हैं and they actually die. So there's several of these issues that are involved, and that's when we decided to go for the first climate march, which was in response to Greta Thunberg's call, and then from there. Pakistan Maholiati Tahaffuz movement का like evolution इस तरह से था कि why should we be responding to the call of the global north? There needs to be somebody, or we need to communicate the जो grassroots जो पाकिस्तानी जो मसाइल हैं उनकी कोई भी आवाज़ उठानी होगी. We need to communicate what the local people over here think. And as far as climate justice is concerned, I just wanted to point out. There's a gap between understanding, like, living life and understanding how environment impacts us. So I just wanted to quickly point out how deep our relation with the environment is. जो शहर में लोग रहते हैं, आप लोगों को क्या कहेंगे? आपको शहरी कहेंगे. जो हल लगाते हैं या आपके फसलें जो उगाते हैं, उनको क्या कहेंगे आप? किसान. पहाड़ पे जो रहता है, पहाड़ी लोग from the north. जो मछली पकड़ता है उसको मछेरा माहीगीर. So all of our identities are based on environment. All of our culture is based on environment. और फिर through that, of course, जो मछली पकड़ रहे हैं, सारी आपके हल लगा रहे हैं, किसान कर रहे हैं, your economy is based on that, and thereby your politics is based on that. और फिर but जो भी हमारी politics हो रही है, that's all about like power politics. There's nothing to do with actually serving the people on the grassroots. And beyond that, we need to figure out how justice has its own forms. अब पहाड़ पे अगर आप जो है वो जो दरिया जा रहा है उसके बराबर में आप होटल्स लगा दें, जब वो दरिया फ्लड करेगा, आपने देख लिया कि क्या हुआ. इसी तरीके से आप माहीगीर को कहें कि जी हम डीप सी ट्रॉलिंग जो है कहते हैं चाइना को अलाउ करेंगे और वो उनकी जो कहते हैं हुकूक मारे जाएंगे, तो गवादर में उठ रहे हैं लोग. So justice has its own forms, and we need to really identify how that translates on the ground.
Bilkul, and exactly how you said, every area of our lives is linked to the environment, and we depend on that environment for livelihoods, security, homes. And so this is a really interconnected issue. Like you said, you have to solve different issues, including poverty, including the provision of a fair livelihood, to be able to solve this climate justice issue. And one of the ways we can do that is, exactly as you said, having an indigenous movement from Pakistan for Pakistanis talking about what we want and what we need. So thank you very much. I'd like to move on to Matthieu. Through your photojournalism, you've documented the experiences of people living in South Asia, and I want to hear specifically about your experience in Jacobabad. So when you went there, of course, we all know that Jacobabad has experienced temperatures over 50 degrees Celsius for many summers, and those temperatures are only going to get hotter. So what was it like for the people there who perhaps were from vulnerable communities, who didn't have the adaptive potential of staying in the shade all day or constantly rehydrating, where they had to be outside for their livelihood? What was their experience like, and what was it like for you to see their experiences?
Well, for me, it was a lot harder because I was not tuned into the weather, so it was a pretty intense experience. For the people, most of the issue, the main issue when you're thinking of Jacobabad was these rolling blackouts because there's no electricity. So there's no way to escape heat. This is just what people don't really understand. My only way to escape heat for like 10, 15 minutes would be to sit in the car and switch it on, have the, which it doesn't help for climate change, by the way. So yeah, that was quite a, for me, the challenge as a photographer was to try and express heat, because it's such, and it's a big issue with climate change, to really express it in a way where you look at it and you feel you're part of it. It's always my challenge. That's also what attracted me initially to work around air. I did a big coverage for National Geographic on air pollution all over the world, and this is also very difficult to perceive. I'm not going to take a picture of the smog hovering. It's too obvious. You need to go deeper and more personal. In this case, I went to Mongolia, to Ulaanbaatar, where there's huge issue with pollution because of money. I mean, a lot of, if not, in my mind, all issues around climate change and pollution is us humans trying to shortcut nature for a quick buck. And that apply in this case in Mongolia, where they are using low-grade coal to burn, and this creates. I mean, our reader for, I forgot what it's called, to monitor air pollution could not, like, it went to 999. It could not follow the amount of pollution that was there. When I photographed in Delhi, air pollution as well, a few years back, the main issue in Delhi, and it's the case a lot in Pakistan, is because of agriculture. It's really heavily linked to the fact that we practice monoculture. We do slash and burn. We burn usually around October, November. I think it's around maybe the same here. The difference between the cold trapping the pollution all around from fires is again us trying to shortcut to have a mechanized, intense agriculture that brings destroy the soil, destroy the quality of the ground. It's happening all over South Asia, and there are many solutions that have been proven that could foster biodiversity, create soil, but yeah, then we have population pressure, so it's complicated.
Yes, as you said, it's a tough issue for policymakers as well to deal with. But one point that I'd like to highlight that I think you brought out then was the idea of privilege and class. So when we talk about the adaptive potential of these communities, obviously there's a certain class who are able to buy masks to protect themselves from the smog, who are able to install air purifiers in their homes, who in the summer are able to sit inside with air conditioners. But we have to recognize that most communities in Pakistan, those most vulnerable, those experiencing the impacts of climate change the most, might not have access to these things. So then we need to find solutions that recognize the vulnerabilities that they have, the position that they're in, and see ways to bridge that gap in how we can help them adapt and how we can help them survive. Because they are the ones at the front of this climate crisis who are experiencing it the most and are affected the worst. So Ms. Afia, I'd like to come back to you to speak about a very important community that you've written a lot about, which is women and girls. So how do gender imbalances exacerbate the effects of climate change on women and girls in Pakistan?
So this is a very painful subject because this subject doesn't go away. You know, just us talking about it and writing about it, and still we see, especially in the kind of disasters that we experienced last year, it completely unpacks, you know, and whatever was invisible becomes visible, that those embedded injustices that you mentioned exist, they continue to exist. Now, I'll make a few separate points and I'll try to knit them together. What Matthieu said about population, that itself is the elephant in the room that nobody talks about, but that is the fundamental issue which leads to these kind of injustices. As far as women are concerned, it's the same thing. They do not have the agency to even accept the fact that, you know, they cannot cope with being a reproductive machine, a continuous reproductive machine. So that is one embedded injustice that plays out into their lives. And if you then, you know, sort of look at these different reports that are periodically published, you look at the National Nutrition Survey, and it shows the level of stunting and malnutrition. And then sometimes then my fraternity also sort of jumps to the other kind of optics. If the children are dying, it's actually an issue of maternal health, because they are, these repeated pregnancies, they are getting weaker and weaker, and they are giving birth to weaker children. So that is one issue. The other, climate change, unfortunately, at least as far as Pakistan is concerned, is viewed in the context of disaster. It's not seen as a scientific, meteorological phenomenon that is affecting, and it is every time when there is a disaster, people start talking about climate change. But those embedded injustices also mean that women are least equipped to deal with these kind of disasters. Half the population, yes, we are a little less than half, that also is an aspect of injustice, but I'll skip that for the moment. Half the population of our country, which is prone to mostly hydro disasters. Mostly hydro. I'm not saying that's the only kind of disasters, but even if you look at our Gilgit-Baltistan, that's a hydro disaster ultimately when there is a glacial lake outburst flood. How many of them know how to swim? How many of them are culturally allowed to learn how to swim? I'm not talking of the city, and even in cities, there is a certain class of women who learn swimming. So, and when those women, for most of their reproductive life, they are pregnant. When there's this onrush of water and you're asked to get out of the way, are they going to get away? How many of them? How easily can they do that? So, and they have other children in tow. Usually there's a baby in the lap, there's a baby in the belly, and there are 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, the different sizes, and they're with them. That's a reality. I mean, I'm trying to say it in a very neutral tone, but I see those women and I feel, you know, and if you speak to them separately, they would not like to be bearing that burden all their life, and it is a burden. Because with that burden, they are the ones who are supposed to carry the water, okay? That may be a cultural embedded injustice. There's climate change, there's water scarcity. So who's going to go looking further and further for that water to be brought to the family? Who's going to be bearing that burden on their bodies to bring that water for the family? So all these things, so these are just 2 examples that I'm giving. I mean, there's so many of this similar nature. So there are these gender, so generally I try to stay away from very strong words. So I'll try to say, okay, there's gender blindness in our society, if not bias, although we do know that very clear biases exist. But that gender blindness is actually impacting just one gender. So who's going to address that injustice? How do we make life easier for them, life more responsive? Now here, I don't want to end, if you'll allow me to just you know, sort of close the loop of this gloom and doom scenario. This is not that something that has not been addressed. And there is a model within Pakistan. So, you know, we don't really need to look at other countries to show those models. I'm sure Matthieu will be able to share those. In Gilgit-Baltistan, as I mentioned, glacial lake outburst flood is the biggest threat to that ecosystem and to the people living within that ecosystem. But over there, a couple of projects to help them deal with that disaster have been implemented, and I won't go into the scientific thing on what they are doing on that. But that entire community has been trained. They undergo drills that, because early warning signals have been placed over there with the help of the Met Department. They have designated safe havens, generally are prayer places, masjid, imam bargahs in those areas. They are at the best place in that community. So the highest place, and they are built better than the poor households. So those are the safe havens. And the community has been told that when you hear this siren, they calculated by carrying out that drill to know in how much time will the weakest person within that community, be it a pregnant woman, be it a small child, or somebody who's physically challenged, can reach that safe haven. And then they saw the impediments. And as all of us must be aware, we've seen our villages, it's a very organic growth. So they are not, these parallel rows between houses. Anybody who wants an extra room, they just extend it out into the lane. But they all agreed. They demolished the portions of their houses willingly because you took the community on board. The community consultations were there. They agreed that this is how it should be because it's for our benefit. And they've demolished those rooms that extended into the lane so there could be these perpendicular lanes from the farthest point to the safe haven. Then they calculated that this is now how much time. And safe havens were not just a space. There's stockpile over there of dry rations, of blankets, of tents, of medicines. So it is being done, it can be done, it must be done on a much larger scale because we are a big country, and this month's season or last year's disaster has shown us that the traditional areas that we always used to think are disaster prone, we used to only think of river floods. That is not the only. This was not a river flood, it came from the mountains. So we need to sort of broaden our scope of responsiveness.
And you've raised a really important issue here, which is the difference between successful adaptation and maladaptation, and that is involving the communities. Because of course they want to protect themselves, but we need to take into account their indigenous knowledge, their understanding, their values, and use those and implement those, because those are the most successful adaptation projects that we can have. Now I want to continue. The theme of this entire literature festival is people, planet, and possibilities. And I don't want us to leave this room without an idea of the possibilities that lie ahead. So Zoha, more on this subject of marginalized communities, how do we empower them to have a voice in shaping climate policy, in shaping climate action? How do we hand the mic over to them?
I actually want to go back to what we were talking about because gender is very, very dear to me as a subject, and I want to address it a little bit further. And that is at the heart of the climate justice conversation, right? I want to quote Mohammed who's from Power Shift Africa, and he said that climate justice is an extension of the struggles of the global south, of indigenous communities, and of local communities for land, for sovereignty, for resources, and against colonialism. That in itself encapsulates the idea of embedded existing justices. When you put it in the context of Pakistan, it is just the struggle of women, it's the struggle of religious minorities, it's the struggle of indigenous communities, of fisher folk, already people who were at the sidelines who are being impacted in much worse ways. One, because they're at the front lines, and then when they face those damages, their ability to cope and rebuild is impacted as well, right? And so when you say, how do we empower people or how do we bring them in, those communities also include, obviously, women as well, among other indigenous groups. And honestly, the simple answer is by empowering them. I realized this over the weekend that when KLF invited me to speak at this panel, the thing that I should have done, that I'm realizing now, is should have said, hey, I'm really thankful and grateful and honored that you've invited me to this panel, but what about this Sindhi journalist who's been working in this area for, say the last 15 years? I think it's all about intent. What happens in the climate justice conversation, in the climate change conversation is कि एक point के बाद हम silos में बात करने लगते हैं. And COP पे भी मैंने यही notice किया था. It's the same conversation over and over and over again. I don't think I am the right person to be speaking on behalf of a woman who's given birth in floodwaters. मुझे नहीं पता. I'm not a girl who's impacted in a way कि मेरी पढ़ाई जो है अब मैं कभी school नहीं वापस जा सकूँगी, right? That's not a lived reality. खुदा न खास्ता, even if I go through, say, something to the effect of an environmental disaster, it's very unlikely that my family's first reaction would be that I should be married off because I'm a vulnerable or a liability or I need to be protected. So I really think it comes down to a matter of intent. I don't know if it's a comprehensive or an eloquent answer or not, but I think it's a matter of intent. You hand the mic by handing the mic. Just find people. It's something that they teach us in journalism school as well. अगर आपको एक subject पे एक नाम बार-बार नज़र आ रहा है, sure they're an expert, but that also means there are other voices out there जो आपको नहीं नज़र आ रही हैं. Make an effort to go find them. So I think, as rudimentary as that answer may sound, I think that's my answer.
No, absolutely. And I think all of us sitting in this room have a level of privilege. And like Sherry Arman said in her keynote speech, people with more resources have a higher responsibility. So we definitely need to keep doing better and sharing our platforms and giving people who've actually experienced the worst impacts of climate change the space to tell us about it and tell us what they need. Thank you. Ahmad, I'd like to come to you and continue this conversation around people-centric justice. So what does that look like in Pakistan? What steps can we take to ensure that we're implementing people-centric justice?
Well, that's a very loaded question as well. Or जैसे Zoha ने भी कहा कि you need people who are representative of the people like on the ground के जिनके ये issues आ रहे हैं. तो you're asking about what can be done, right? So उसमें तो like I have a feeling क्या now like all of these the existing leadership will be challenged electorally as well. हम ना करें तो जो कहते हैं जो लोकल जो लीडर्स हैं जो जैसे उन्होंने कहा कि आपके इंडिजिनस राइट्स अलायंस वाले लोग हैं मलिर एक्सप्रेसवे के जो कहते हैं लोग हैं गुज्जर नाले के जो कहते हैं लोग हैं या गवादर में आपके मौलाना हिदायत रहमान हैं और दूसरे जो बाबा जान जो कहते हैं वहाँ पे गिलगित बल्तिस्तान की तरफ हैं they will come up and they will challenge the existing leadership like if you want to call it that electorally. और दूसरा do we really think कि जो पिछले 30-40 साल से the people who've been leading us or who've been involved in politics, who've basically introduced malpractice or maintained that practice, do you think they will be the ones to make a difference? They will not be the ones who make a difference at all. I mean, so पिछली हुकूमत मैं कहूँगा कि जो है it was busy in greenwashing, million-tree tsunami, billion-tree tsunami. What happened about that? I have no idea. This government, I believe, is busy in greenwashing and climate blaming. उससे पहले था कि जी कुदरती आफात है, disaster था, हो गया, सब कुछ हो गया. अब है कि जो कहते हैं जी वो it's all because of climate change. We're only 1% emitters. बाकी global north का मसला है, सब कुछ है. तो what about the responsibility that that lies on you? आप लोग क्या कर रहे हैं? अब कल जो है जो शहीद रहमान साहबा जो कह के चली गई उन्होंने कहा कि जी अगले साल जो अब ये प्लास्टिक की बोतल नहीं होगी कुछ वो नहीं होगा great but where are the policies that are implemented you cannot just say कि अच्छा प्लास्टिक की इंडस्ट्री ख़त्म कर दें इन लोगों को ये फैक्ट्रियाँ गिरा दें थैलियों की इंडस्ट्री ख़त्म कर दें you need to slow and steady build that policy transform your country into something वरना अगर आपको इतना आपको climate justice के बारे में आपको बात अगर करनी है तो let's take a local example. गुज्जर नाला आपने गिराया कि उस पे जी आपका urban flooding होती है कचरा उसी तरह से जो कहते हैं नाले में जमा होता है उसके बाद जो कहते हैं वो पानी like it's not getting out वो जो नकासी आपकी वैसे की वैसे ख़राब है मगर आपने displaced all the people over there and you haven't even settled them and this is Sharif Rahman's government as well like over here this People's Party government over here as well. दूसरा Nasla Tower आपने गिरा दिया. Nasla, you got rid of Nasla Tower because it was encroaching upon something. Great. How about MR? Sorry? So how about MR? That's my next question. MR, DHA has no legal right to reclaim any land. आप National Institute of Oceanographic के पास जाएं. National Institute of Oceanography के पास जाएं, they have no records, they don't know like who's reclaimed all this land. DHA blames somebody else, Port Qasim blames somebody else. You've, erected MR, 6 tall towers, and you're going to erect 33 more. Do you realize what impact it will have on the seabed and on Port Qasim itself, all the way, जो कहते हैं आपका किमाड़ी की side पे भी और सारी उस पे भी, आप कर क्या रहे हैं? गिराएं आप, MR गिराएं? अगर इतना आपको जो कहते हैं, that's where justice is all about. If you want actual justice on ground, it needs to be equal all around. So, going forward, you need policies, that are actually rooted on what the impact is on the ground, what the people's opinion is, और जो कहते हैं जो लोग उनके, तो आप जाएं, आप अच्छा बुंदार बुद्धू आइलैंड की भी जो बात हो रही थी, जी tallest building बनेगी वहाँ पे, पीडा बनेगा, तो मैं ये कहता हूँ जो पीडा रूडा दोनों बेहुदा, यानी रूडा आप वो बना रहे हैं, पीडा आप क्या बना रहे हैं? जब आपका $50 billion की जो कहते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट होगी, इंडस्ट्री आएगी, आप इब्राहिम हैदरी की सड़कें बेहतर कर दें ज़रा सी, आपको खुद आपकी जो अच्छी खासी इन्वेस्टमेंट आ जाएगी, आप फिशरीज़ की इंडस्ट्री सही करें, आप जो माहीगीर हैं उनको ज़रा सा बेहतर, ये नहीं कहते हैं ज़रूरियात जो उनकी हैं वो पूरी करें, उनको फराहम करें, then you move forward. Otherwise, like if you're trying to implement policies idhar-udhar se chun ke ya like adopting it, just from the global north without listening to the indigenous people, you're definitely not going to move forward. And I can see that, like I'm pretty sure that even this year, or maybe in the new year, upcoming cycles and everything, these people will be challenged electorally.
And this also comes back to something that Matthieu said earlier, which is people are in it to make a quick buck. And often that comes at the loss of lives, livelihoods, homes, but it also comes at the loss of money. So it doesn't really make sense in terms of our economic intent. If we want to uplift Pakistan economically, then we need to think about how the environment is going to respond to these developments as well. So it really doesn't match up. And like you said, it's time for us to stop putting development ahead of people. Now for our last question before we go to the audience for their interventions, Matthieu, I'd like to ask you about the story that you covered on the communities in Hunza, which was for the evolution of diet photo journalism. So there, you talked about the sustainable lifestyle. You shot that and gave us a perspective and insight into how those communities were living in tandem with the ecosystem. So can you tell us a little more about what we can learn from these lifestyles? We know that climate change is a symptom of overconsumption, which demands greater extraction. So what can we learn from the indigenous knowledge about the ecosystem? What did you learn from those communities?
Well, that the ties within the communities are very strong, that the education is a big priority for women as much as for men, equality in terms of education. That's a big pride there in Hunza, but it doesn't necessarily apply to all the self-sufficient communities. I have photographed for that story because I went to a lot of countries. As far as Hunza, there is this very strong link to ancient practices that have not veered off so far. Things have changed with the KKH, being more, people being more, can easily access Hunza now. There's been change in diets that's affecting health. Again, shortcut to a short-term vision for their livelihood personally, I think. But the youth is very, perceives that very well. And is trying their best to kind of make sure that they hold on to the old traditions and that have, make them strive in this environment that is quite harsh. Not much mechanized activities so far. That plays a lot, And when I did this story on the evolution of diet, I realized we can adapt to more or less anything we eat if we actually take part in the environment physically. That has inspired me in my life personally also. I have a personal project where I'm planting trees for a few years now. I see the benefits in it. there is a certain mental quietness that comes with connecting to nature, and they have the benefits of being immersed in it. In the cities, you can still do that. You know, urban gardens, all these things should be really fostered to really give that sensibility to the environment, push it as much as you can. Meaning having dirty hands full of earth, you know, this is really something that goes very deep into our being as how we, you know, came to explore ourselves and the world. It's very strong and very powerful, and then you can't look the other way. Personally, I cannot look the other way. So it hurts me in a lot of my travels to see the inflict of how much, and I can feel your passion in also feeling the injustice that is going on there, and that can feel is out of your hands. But I believe that people like Ahmed and all of you here on a very small level within the community can have a tremendous effect on, say, land grab here that is happening like crazy. I shot a story on mangrove for a time about a year ago, and yeah, I was quite shocked about what's happening, and it's like, what? I mean, you gotta go and you chain yourself up to these areas, to those trees. No, you know, like you need to go all in, and for this you need to have that strong connection and understand what that means. That we depend on that. It's difficult, yeah. You get caught in life where the meaning of success in life becomes very, very different. It's again short-term vision in my mind.
Thank you so much.
Usman, I just wanted to add to as Matthieu said, you need to change yourself or you need to come in the wave. I completely agree. But then people try to do that. Magar usme us baat pe aake our own turn their forces against us. Maleer Expressway जो कहते हैं वहाँ पे पहले वादा किया गया कि कोई घर नहीं गिरेंगे, but now जो कहते हैं DHA से DHA सिटी में लाने के लिए मलेर एक्सप्रेस बना रहे हैं, सामो गोट के घर गिरा रहे हैं और बाकी वो भी कर रहे हैं, and once like the rains happen once again, आप लोग देखेंगे कि ये DHA वाले भी डूबेंगे, फिर डूबेंगे, 2020 में भी डूबे, 2022 में भी डूबे. Then when the Bundar Buddu Island thing happened and there were ships, 25 or 30 ships by Pakistan fisher folk that were trying to go towards Bundar Buddu, वहाँ पे boats आ गई थी और जो कहते हैं the guns were facing the people who were protesting. Similarly, Baba Jan जब जो कहते हैं अताबाद लेकर issue हुआ, he was thrown into jail. So नाजिम जोखियों का केस आप ले लें, परवीन रहमान का केस आप ले लें. So people are trying to resist. But then, these people need to be highlighted, and these people, and more people need to join them. Otherwise, they'll pick us one by one.
This is very important what both Matthieu and Ahmad have said. But there's one distinction that I want to make over here. There are these different circles, and there's one intersecting one. So climate and environment are two different things. And then there is something that intersects. And our environmental actions affect the climate. So the global consumption, the fossil fuel extraction, etc., is impacting the climate. And at a local level, even for justice, when we say climate justice, I would much rather use the word environmental justice in the local context. Because climate justice is of another level of what Zoha had covered over there. She saw the negotiations. And when we use the word climate instead of environment, so it somehow overwhelms you and feels that this is beyond our capacity to do something about, because this is a global problem. We are not part of the problem. We are not the creators of the problem. But environmental issues, it is not climate change that is blocking our drains, that is leading to urban flooding. Just to give one example, And then those embedded injustices that we do not have adequate housing, that is not something to do with climate. So if people are living within those hazardous areas, and that's an embedded injustice, that's a societal injustice. And then when the elements pour down on them, we blame the climate. But actually it is a municipal failure. So if we link those two things, then that becomes a problem. Now, where those two things may intersect, if we destroy our green cover, which we have, Karachi में जो लोग रहते हैं और अगर कोई आधी सदी से ज़्यादा यहाँ उन्होंने गुजारी है, तो उनको याद होगा कि कराची की तमाम सब्ज़ी और तमाम फल मलीर और गडाब से आता था, और हमारा टेम्परेचर इतना हाई कभी भी नहीं होता था। हमारे भी शहर के अंदर बेशक इतने ज़्यादा ग्रीन एरियाज़ नहीं थे, और कंक्रीटाइजेशन बढ़ गई है। एक्चुअली ग्रीन एरियाज़ कम तो हुए हैं, लेकिन वो जो तनासुब हम बताते हैं उसमें हमें ये समझने की ज़रूरत है कि कंक्रीटाइजेशन बढ़ गई है। तो अगर वो कटे इतने नहीं हैं तो बहरहाल वो कम है उस तनासुब से, जो एक ग्लोबली रिकमेंडेड आपका परसेंटेज है। But our city was surrounded by this green cover. Our hinterland was green, and that is what kept the temperature down. So when you interfere in that manner for shortcut those gains and monetary gains which Matthieu spoke about, that's when we harm ourselves. 2015 is an alarm bell that we seem to have forgotten about, the heat wave. Why did that? I mean, yes, the temperature was there, but we have cities with higher temperatures. It was, I think, 43 here. We have cities which have always experienced near about 50s. But people weren't dying out in the streets, you know, like that. That's because we have the building material, the building style we have adopted, and those are not in sync with the environment. So हमें ये चीज़ें देखनी है कि ये चीज़ें हम फिक्स कर सकते हैं। वो ग्लोबल क्लाइमेट डिबेट और जस्टिस और इनजस्टिस और नॉर्थ और साउथ की जो है वो होनी चाहिए, उस पर बात होनी चाहिए। लेकिन जिन चीज़ों को हमने खुद बिगाड़ा है उनको हम खुद सही कर सकते हैं बगैर क्लाइमेट चेंज के ऊपर मलबा डाले हुए।
I want to be very respectful of the fact that we are short on time, but I just want to go back to your question about passing the mic and privilege, and I think that that's where it comes down to, right? Like, we can use our privilege, and I'm speaking strictly as media, to hold local or national bodies accountable for environmental justice, which is a local issue, and then at the same time making sure that people in communities that are directly impacted by climate change are also at the forefront. And I think that's one very important way of using privilege, is that you reconcile, almost sort of create a balance, because it's important कि कौन से सवाल पूछ रहा है, right? And it's on to us, it's upon local communities, it's on local journalists to be asking those questions of accountability from their governments constantly, like regardless of who comes into power, it doesn't matter. Especially for young people, I honestly don't think it matters. To us, it's like, what are you doing, you know, for us, for our future? And so I think that that is really important in terms of using your privilege, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's through protests or not, whether, you know, it's by standing with people who've been doing this work, giving them the limelight, giving them the center stage, but standing behind them because you know that your privilege protects you in a way that theirs doesn't protect them. So I think that's very important.
We'd like to involve you in this conversation. So comments, questions, we'd like to hear from you. There's a mic going around. We can start with the lady in pink. And if you have a question to a specific panelist, you can identify them as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Dr. Rosina Sevani, belong to the Iqra University. आपने गुजर नाले की बात की, so I remember I did one research when Gujar Nala, they're demolishing their homes. So it brought a lot of impact on school going, especially girls. So many girls were pressurized to leave schools. Dropout was so high क्योंकि उनके घर नहीं बचे वहाँ पे. So it was so bad, and I did research, but I don't know how we can highlight these issues. I mean, there is so much gap. We can do research, we can do recommendation, but nobody is here who can take it in that way. Another thing is my responsibility related to the ethics and social responsibilities, where my students are working towards SDGs, which are connected with climate change and all the things. They're working everywhere. They are ready to bring change over there. 200, 300 students from one campus. At a time, they're working for the environment cleaning, mangroves, marine life, all the things. What we are missing? Gap is there. For time being, they're working over there, but there was no one, or still no one, who can guide them for further future plannings. आप बाहर मुल्क में चले जाएं, you can find out so many aquarium sites, and they have complete museum to share with them marine life, endangered species and all the things, but here we cannot find out anything. Students are ready to use their resources. It's shocking, they visited Qaid-e-Azam tomb and barren land is over there. They, planted over plants and all the thing, but still they are using their resources. But koi to ho, jo unko support kare. May I request you all, please come forward. The way Stephen Covey is saying, take baby steps. Come forward, aware our students. We are trying to give them we are involving Aga Khan institutions to bring their earthquake and other awareness, natural disaster and other things.
You.
The way you are talking about Hunza, please come forward and help us in that regard.
Thank you so much. So we'll take 2 more questions before we go back to the panelists here in the front. And there, piche.
Thank you very much. पहले हम सुनते थे कि खुदा का अजाब है climate change. अभी recently हम सुन रहे हैं हम less than 1% वाले हैं, कोई दूसरा जिम्मेदार है. But thank you very much कि आपने रियासत की culpability को ज़ाहिर करने की कोशिश की. Basically it's a political economy issue है. तो उसमें आपने grassroots का जिक्र किया. Do you think कि grassroots में जो जितनी तहरीकें हैं इतने पावर है कि वो रियासत को should I say कि आड़े हाथों ले और उसकी पॉलिसी को चेंज करने की कोशिश करें rather than वो टेक्नोक्रेटिक सोल्यूशन पे जाएं और हमें फिगर्स दे के कहें कि we are not responsible and trying to hide themselves behind certain technical I mean जो टेक्नोक्रेटिक reasons हैं उनके नीचे छुपने के बजाय वो अपने political economy को दुरुस्त करें कि why people are vulnerable, why society pushing them at the margin. क्या ये आपसे क्वेश्चंस है कि ग्रास रूट्स में इतनी पावर है कि वो रियासत के सामने खड़े होके अपने इन मुश्किलात का अजाला कर सके, अपनी बात मनवा सके?
Thank you so much. Just one more question in the 3rd row, if you could pass the mic. The 3rd row. Ji.
I just wanted to ask the panelists, you spoke about the link between the grassroots level and the international level. If you could, since we're an agri-economy, if you could speak about the agreement of agriculture and the role that our political parties and the army has towards the rights of the indigenous people. And frankly, the feudals happen to be the people who are in power, who are fostering an anti-Kisan movement in our country. So I would love it if you could speak a little bit about that, because I don't think we've touched enough on the perpetrators of the injustice. We've spoken more about those who suffer at the hands of the injustice.
Yeah, if you could pass the mic.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Babar Jamali. I just wanted to ask 2 small questions from the panels. One thing we have heard a lot about billion tree tsunamis for the past 6-7 years. I'm from Balochistan and I think there are hardly 500,000 trees planted in Balochistan. And in contrary to that, millions of trees are planted in the northern areas. Okay, thank you, sorry. So does it have any impact on Balochistan if we plant trees in the north? Does it have any impact in the south? One thing. And second thing that the recently concluded, I think it was not recent, in November 2000, the COP27. So how and when can Pakistan benefit from it if we have challenges and threats at the domestic level? How Pakistan is the most vulnerable to these climate global changes. So how can we benefit from that? I mean, maybe this is a preemptive question, but if you can comment on this, thank you very much.
The lady who asked over there about the perpetrators, it's going to sound very cynical, whichever way I put it. You mentioned 2 categories of people, जो कि हमारी agrarian economy के ऊपर उनका influence है. मेरे ख्याल में उन दोनों का ऑब्जेक्टिव एक है. आप राइट्स की बात कर रही हैं, उनका ऑब्जेक्टिव ये है कि वो राइट्स अपने लिए लें दूसरों से, दूसरों के राइट्स यूज़अप करें. आई कैन नॉट रियली पुट इट एनी अदर वे. जो परपेट्रेटर्स हैं, दे आर नॉट द वंस हू गोइंग टू गिव द राइट्स. और जो इन्होंने कहा था कि ये जो इंडिजिनस कम्युनिटीज़ के अंदर क्या इतनी हिम्मत है कि वो स्टेट की रेट को चेंज कर रहे हैं, तो मेरे ख्याल में अब तक पाकिस्तान में कहीं जब भी कोई बेहतरी आई है वो ग्राउंड स्वेल की वजह से ही आई है। चाहे वो एक छोटे से शहर गवादर में देखें हम, या इससे पहले जो पॉलिटिकल मूवमेंट्स हैं जिन्होंने बड़े बड़े आमरों के ख़िलाफ़ आपकी छोटी छोटी तहरीकें जो हैं वो बड़ी बनती चली गई और उन्होंने काम किया। वो क्रिटिकल मास हमारा अभी शायद नहीं हुआ है, लेकिन आप एलीट तबके से तो ये तवक्को नहीं कर सकते कि वो अपने ही ऑर्डर को वो डिस्टर्ब करेंगे। ये ग्राउंड से ही ये आएंगी और इन्हीं को, जैसे जोहा ने कहा, उनके पीछे खड़े होने की ज़रूरत है। उनकी आवाज़ों को, हम प्रिविलेज लोग हैं, हम लिखते हैं, हम टीवी पे आते हैं, हम बात करते हैं, ऐसे फोरम्स पे हमें मौका मिलता है, तो ये हमारा हक नहीं, हमारा फ़र्ज़ बनता है कि हम उनकी बातों को एम्पलीफाई करें। अगर वो ख़ुद फिज़िकली ऐसे फोरम्स पे मौजूद नहीं हैं, अव्वल तो उनको आई एग्री कि होना चाहिए, आई टोटली एग्री विद दैट, लेकिन अगर नहीं आ सकते, एंड देयर आर मेनी रीजंस व्हाई दे कांट, I will still have my say over here. I may say something very radical, very nasty, and may still be in the safety of my home. They may not be able to enjoy that safety when they say those things and go back. तो उसमें फिर जो प्रिविलेज लोग हैं, ये उनके ऊपर जिम्मेदारी होती है कि वो ये काम करें। और आपने जो पूछा था, यस, वो अच्छा, मैं चूँकि उन फोरम्स पे भी थी जहाँ पे ये डिस्कशन होती, तो मेरे हलक में अटकता है, मैंने वहाँ कह दिया, मैं आई हैव नेवर अटर्ड द वर्ड सुनामी। मैंने कहा, मैं हर दफ़ा डिस्क्लेमर देती थी कि मैं एक साहिली शहर की बाशिंदा हूँ, मैं सुनामी का लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल नहीं करती, मैं उसको बिलियन एंड देन 10 बिलियन एफॉरेस्टेशन प्रोजेक्ट मैंने हमेशा कहा है, विच इज़ अ गुड थिंग। देखिए, हम किसी अच्छे काम को, उसके ऊपर क्रिटिसिज्म हो सकता है, उसकी पॉकेट्स में हो सकता है, उसकी स्पीशीज सिलेक्शन पे हो सकता है, उसके एरिया इतना कम है, किसी ख़ास एरिया में ज़्यादा हुआ, वो उस पर क्रिटिसाइज़ हम कर सकते हैं, लेकिन कि ये कि ट्री प्लांटेशन इज़ समथिंग वी कांट क्रिटिसाइज़ इन पाकिस्तान। हमारा बेयरली 2% फॉरेस्ट कवर है, और ये सिर्फ फॉरेस्ट की बात कर रही हूँ, मैं ग्रीन कवर की बात नहीं कर रही जो इससे अलहदा होता है। रिकमेंडेड 25% है। तो जो भी इस किस्म के इनिशिएटिव हैं वो बहुत ज़रूरी हैं। जिस तरह हमने अपने मैंग्रोव्स को 300% बढ़ाया है, इसी तरह से जहाँ जहाँ फॉरेस्ट कवर बढ़ाया जा सकता है उसकी ज़रूरत है, तो उसको अप्रिशिएट करना चाहिए। बट सबसे ज़्यादा ज़रूरत क्या है? ओवरसाइट, सिविल सोसाइटी ओवरसाइट। आई थिंक वो चीज़ें जो है ना वो मेंटेन या वो सस्टेनेबिलिटी की तरफ लेके जाएंगी। खाली वो प्रोजेक्ट टीम जो है उसको हम उसका जिम्मेदार ना समझें।
Ahmad, if you'd like to comment.
Sure, yeah. अच्छा, इस बात पे जो आफिया और हमारी जो कहते हैं वो होती ज़्यादा सी बहस होती है कि जो मैंग्रोव्स की जो बात होती है कि मैंग्रोव्स 300% बढ़े तो हैं, मगर उससे पहले कितने फ़ीसद घटे थे, फिर उसके बाद बढ़े। तो जो है, जो हज़ारों मैंग्रोव्स घटे, फिर उसके बाद आपने 300% बढ़े, तो ऑफ कोर्स देयर इज़ अ लॉट दैट नीड्स टू बी डन एज वेल। तो ये एक हमारे उस्ताद भी यहाँ पे बैठे हैं, अब्बास हुसैन साहब, वो इको इस्लाम और माहौलियात के हवाले से, जो मज़हब क्या कहता है उसके हवाले से भी बात करते हैं। तो ये पता नहीं अप्रोप्रिएट है या नहीं है, मगर जो एक ट्रांसलेशन है मेरे ख्याल से रूम से, कि खुशकी और तरी में फसाद बर्पा हो चुका है लोगों के अपने हाथों की कमाई से, ताकि मज़ा चखाएं उनको कि उनके बाज़ अमाल का शायद कि वो बाज आ जाएं। तो एक तो ये जो क्लाइमेट चेंज है, जो एनवायरनमेंट है, ये तो मज़ा चखा रही है हमें। फिर जो आपने जो पूछा कि रियासत और जो इंडिजिनस लोग हैं वो भी मज़ा चखाएंगे इनको, तो वो ये है कि अब आप खुद तहरीकें देख लें। हक दो गवादर को तहरीक है आपकी, वहाँ पे यानी सही है, जमात इस्लामी के हैं जो यानी मौलाना हिदायत और बाकी, मगर सच रेजिलिएंट यानी मूवमेंट। और वहाँ पे जो कहते हैं मर्दों को बचाने के लिए जब पुलिस का वो हुआ था, तो ख़वातीन आके घेरा किया था उनका, कि पुलिस वालों का घेरा किया था कि लेके जाके दिखाओ। और बिल्कुल यानी उनके जो सारे मुद्दे हैं जो बिल्कुल एब्सोल्युटली वैलिड हैं। फिर आपका लाहौर में हुकूक खल्क पार्टी जो है, जिसके अमार अली जान थे और बिलाल ज़हूर जो कहते हैं कल उसमें आए हुए थे। फिर यहाँ पे कराची की तरफ इंडिजिनस राइट्स अलायंस है, कराची बचाओ तहरीक है। हमारी पाकिस्तान माहौलियाती तो बहुत ही छोटी सी है, मगर ऑफ कोर्स इफ़ यू गाइस वांट टू गेट इन्वॉल्व्ड, यू नो, मोर देन वेलकम टू, यू नो, आप लोग ज्वाइन करें। तो इस तरह के तहरीकें बढ़ेंगी, और ये अगेन लाइक आई सेड, इसी इलेक्शन में इनको जो है इलेक्टोरली चैलेंज करेंगे, और जो है हम भी करेंगे इंशाल्लाह, और उसी तरह से करेंगे कि मुझे अब सारे जो भी आपके मुद्दे हैं माहौलियात के हिसाब से करें। हमने जो कहते हैं, जो आपने भी जो पूछा कि साइंसेस वगैरह के हवाले से, ये जो आपके वो हैं, तो मैग्निफिसेंस इज़ एन अमेजिंग स्पेस। मैग्निफिसेंस जाएँ, वहाँ पे जो मैंग्रोव्स का तारिक अलेक्जेंडर क्लेसर का जो एग्जिबिट है, it's amazing. But we need more and more spaces like that. So, like some of the topics that we'll be working on in the next 10, in the next year or so, it's water supply and security, law and order. Achha, people ask, how is law and order connected to environment? आपका जो traffic police वाला जो 12 घंटे खड़ा होता है in a congested road, you and I sit in ACs, we're privileged enough to travel in a car, but that police वाला जिसको हम गाली देके भी चले आते हैं, जिसको हम वो कहते हैं अच्छा ये तो हर वक्त जो है रिश्वत खाता रहता है, सब कुछ करता रहता है, तो he is standing in heat and in cold and rain, smog, सारी चीजें, गर्दो गुबार, fumes, क्या क्या वो, तो उनकी तरफ भी हमें देखने की बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरत है और ये जो grassroots movements हैं यही इनको सीधा करेंगे, यही इनको जो कहते हैं मज़ा चखाएंगे, absolutely.
Zoha, Matthieu, do you want to add anything? Because I'm sorry, we're out of time for more questions.
पार्टनरशिप विद गवर्नमेंट, अगर मैं तो एक छोटी सी एग्जांपल दूं आपको, ये जो अभी फेडरल गवर्नमेंट ने रेजिलिएंट रिकवरी रिकंस्ट्रक्शन एंड रिहेबिलिटेशन फ्रेमवर्क बनाया है जिस पे $9 बिलियन का कमिटमेंट आपको मिला है, इज इट अ मीगर थिंग? क्या गवर्नमेंट नहीं कर रही काम? थोड़ी सी पार्टनरशिप पे बात होना चाहिए.
नहीं देखिए, sorry, like I'm just going to take a quick second. I completely agree. Partnership is the way forward. क्योंकि जो है isolation में तो कोई भी कुछ नहीं कर सकता. But then again, the government, sure, they're setting aside funds, etc. But they need to show how serious they are. अब एक concept मैं वो करने की कोशिश करता हूँ, development ले लें. क्या हर चीज़ development है? हमें ये भी definition change करने की ज़रूरत है कि development और construction में फ़र्क है. अब random चीज़ कोई जो कहते हैं construct अगर करें तो वो development आप उसको नहीं कह सकते. अब for example आपके घरों में पानी की टंकी की ज़रूरत, you need water tanks, right? तो आप अपने बेडरूम के अंदर वो वाटर टैंक बनाएंगे? Is that proper planning? अपने बेडरूम के अंदर या अपने लिविंग रूम के अंदर? चलें वहाँ पे नहीं, आप अपने चौकीदार का जो कमरा है उसमें बना दें पानी की टंकी. Is that okay as well? Is that good planning? तो नहीं, तो you will find an appropriate spot कि जो है कहते हैं जी छत के ऊपर अगर लोड बेरिंग हो या जो कहते हैं आपका अंडरग्राउंड किसी उस पे हो, उसके हिसाब से आप बनाएं. या अगर नहीं आप कर सकते, then you move. You try to design your entire house that way. अब उसी चीज़ को फॉर एग्जांपल मलिर एक्सप्रेसवे आपका बन रहा है, मलिर एक्सप्रेसवे आप बना रहे हैं, ग्रेट. एक जगह पे आप जो कहते हैं बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स आप कह रहे हैं कि जी रेपरेशंस भी होने चाहिए एंड वी आर पुटिंग फंड्स इन एंड एवरीथिंग, एंड देन ऑन द अदर हैंड यू आर एक्चुअली डिस्प्लेसिंग पीपल एंड यू आर नॉट इवन रीसेटलिंग देम प्रॉपर्ली. सो देन व्हेन द ग्रासरूट्स मूवमेंट से कि यू आर नॉट सीरियस अबाउट पार्टनरशिप्स, then we need to listen to them. अगर पार्टनरशिप पे आप करने आए तो बिल्कुल क्यों नहीं करेंगे ग्रासरूट्स मूवमेंट, हम लोग भी करेंगे पार्टनरशिप्स. But then the रियासत का ये वो है कि they need to show that seriousness.
I'm just going to take a very brief minute. आपने एक technical सवाल किया था about COP27 and what was decided on there. तो उसका बहुत simple जवाब ये है कि at least for the next 2 years we don't know how Pakistan will benefit. अभी वो fund operationalize नहीं हुआ है, हमें नहीं पता है कि पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे, कौन कितने देगा. So that's the simple answer. और जो आपका सवाल था, I just want to add one small thing is that मायूसी as a concept बहुत self indulgent होती है. तो अगर हम ये सोच के बैठ जाएं कि ये movements बहुत छोटी हैं, ये कैसे रियासत को challenge करेंगी, तो हमने already accept कर लिया है that we're destined to fail. So I think it's as simple as that. कतरा कतरा बन के दरिया समंदर, whichever way you'd like to call it, that's just the way it is. Whatever part you can play, whether it is protesting, whether it is planting a tree, whether it is separating your waste, मायूसी is not an option, is all I'd like to say to that.
And I think that's a great way to end this session. Thank you all so much, and thank you all for being here and for sharing your thoughts. Please don't let this conversation end here.
एक point रहेगा, sorry, उनका जो कहते हैं, I apologize, उनका जो feudals का जो कहते हैं वो था, आपका point था. तो feudal lords और सरदाराना निज़ाम, we need to revisit that absolutely as well. I actually some of my relatives are feudals as well, और यहाँ पे भी बैठे हैं, उनको भी मैं बताऊँ कि जो कहते हैं they need to move into the 21st century as well and slow and steady work with for towards a new system. सरदाराना निज़ाम रह गया था, I apologize.
Thank you everyone.